Patrick Hoops from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
James Walker here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Roy Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Orr, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hello, friends. It's MJ from the Coaches Panel. 2 weeks left to go in your fantasy football year. If you're playing for rankings, man, it is make or break time. Or for leagues, it's preliminary final week, whether you play the draft or the salary cap formats. There is a ton of stuff we need to get through before we wrap up this episode. I've got Kane back. Hello, mate. How are you?
Good, thank you, MJ. It's exciting now. There's not long to go at all, and there's not many trades, and there's a hell of a lot of games.
Yeah, there is a lot of football that is about to get underway. And in fact, just in a handful of hours at time of recording, the St Kilda Saints take on the West Coast Eagles. And then Thursday night footy rolls through till Monday night at its conclusion. Collingwood taking on Gold Coast. No more buys, no best 18, although some teams might be stuck at best 18. And we'll get to that in just a second. And the important thing, your teams get announced 24 hours prior to. So 6:20 Australian Standard Time, or Eastern Standard Time, should I say, is when it is. So at 6:20 this evening, in Melbourne time, Sydney time, that's when you're going to find out about your Cats and your Tigers and so on and so on. Mate, there's a fair bit to get through, but let's go really right to an important point that a lot of coaches are going to have to face. If you're in Dream Team and SuperCoach, and I think there is some AFL fantasy relevance to the discussion, probably the most important weapon you have in your arsenal, while there are several, probably the most important thing you can have in your team right now is the option to make a trade or two this week.
Oh, absolutely, MJ. If you've got them up your sleeve, we're going to be talking between 100, 200, and depending if it's a premium player that you can get to, even up to 300 points you could be giving up this week if you don't have cover, especially in the SuperCoach format, with some of the ceilings that are, capable of players this year with the condensed fixture. So if you've got them up your sleeve, you've got a huge advantage, especially if you're a league player and you can, it's a unique in your favour. And I think the timing is what coaches really were careful of last week, as you mentioned off the top. When you don't know teams until 24 hours before, it's really hard to plan. And I think what we've seen a lot of coaches do is just be really patient. Unfortunately, they might have to miss the player they would ideally want, but they've had to be, cautious enough to wait and see as many teams as they can before they have to pull the trigger on a player. And there's a lot of players, unfortunately, as we sit here, before the first game of round 17, under injury clouds, already ruled out.
Well, let's talk about some of those players. And again, at time of recording, nothing has been confirmed, but there is a lot of potential concerns. One of those, Jai Simpkin, who was ruled out midway through the game with a concussion. He is coming off a 7-day break, but let's also be realistic. North season is done. There's no point risking arguably their best player that's playing right now. Cunnington's in the mix, but Simpkin's the brightest star that North Melbourne fans have seen coming through that club for the past few years. Throw in Doherty, who had a calf test, and there's been a strain picked up in that medical scan yet. Nothing locked, and certain he's going to miss, nor certain that he'll play. Zach Williams is questionable, coming back from an Achilles. Josh Kelly, if you're still holding him from his concussions, already missed 2 games. No certainty, but promising signs. Jack Martin is another popular player that a few coaches had kind of gone and picked up a couple of weeks ago, and he's not been, flying. Angus Brayshaw, again, possible guy to come back in, but no certainty that he's going to get picked up. James Warple is definitely out for the year, as is Jack Redden. And all of a sudden, coaches that find themselves with that trade or two up their hands, or as you've alluded to, can hold their AFL fantasy trades back as late in the round as possible. It actually could be one of those surging moments, either in a deciding decision in a matchup or a little ranking spike, even if you can't get to the top spot.
Well, MJ, it divides the community this last few rounds of the season, because there's people with trades up their sleeve that want as much carnage as possible.
Yeah.
And especially what they want is popular players. And Doherty is a great one because
Simpkin.
he is so highly owned. Simpkin, again, really highly owned. Zach Williams and Jack Martin were both guys that, were brought into a lot of teams mainly because they were buy free.
Yeah.
Why does it seem
And
like
cheap.
every year? They were valued definitely for what their potential was. And again, I think this has shown what most people know about players. If there's an injury risk, one that's unfortunately consistent most years, usually it does rear its head again. Luke Shuey was battling a hamstring injury. And what happens? The hamstring goes again. And in this condensed fixture where, a week is 2 games, we saw it with Josh Kelly's concussion, unfortunately, and we obviously don't know what happened with Simpkin yet, but again, it's not much time.
No.
And it's hard to get everything cleared to be right. So, coaches with trades will be wanting things to go wrong in that sense so they can use them and pick up that advantage. The other fact is there's a lot of coaches in great positions overall-wise that will be sitting on no trades.
Yeah.
Because they've gone really hard to try to get points, ahead of everyone else. And the hope is that, this doesn't happen and they'll just be governed by, who they have in their team and how badly they're hit. But the one thing that immediately jumps out to me, MJ, is your cover. Who is your cover on the Pine? And most importantly, when do they play relative to the players that you've got out? So let's start with the Giants in Melbourne.
Yep.
I think a lot of people, Zach Williams owners will be watching closely what happens with that team sheet. But also on the Pine, a lot of people have Trent Rivers, who, since he's come back to the side, has played great footy and produced some really solid scores.
Yeah.
On the weekend, 82 points he dished
in
up
SuperCoach,
for people who didn't have Zach Williams. That's a really, really handy score.
Yeah, 50, 60 odd in DreamTeam and AFL Fantasy as well, yeah.
And this is where I think it gets interesting. Obviously, if you have no trades, you're just doing whatever you can to get as many bodies on the field. But this is where if you've got, one and you've got cover, try your best to have a look at that score. And unfortunately, if you are a Zach Williams owner, you won't be able to have a look at what Trent Rivers does.
No.
You're just going to have to hope, that he does okay. But there might be other players, for instance, if you've got Doherty.
Yeah.
If you've got Doherty, you can actually look and see how Rivers goes.
Yeah.
And if Rivers puts out a 60, you might think, well, my replacement for Doherty, might get 100. That's only a 40-point gain. Maybe you can find that 40 points down another avenue.
Or with a vice captaincy or something, yeah.
Yeah, or maybe by waiting long enough, you can see, if someone else is, pulled up well, or maybe there will be, there could be a surprise omission just for soreness and these sort of things. So you've got to weigh up, how much points will I actually generate. Again, you alluded to, Lockie Scholl for Adelaide. He's playing Carlton. So again, you won't be able to look at his score before deciding on whether you trade Doherty or not, assuming that he's out. But at least you have that option. And I think we've got to use all these options, even if they're unlikely. Brad Close in the forward line.
Yeah.
If he's covering potentially a Jack Martin or a Jai Simpkin, he's playing on Friday night. Have a look at him before you pull the trigger on that move for those two guys again, if they're ruled out. Because if you luck into a 70-plus score from someone like Brad Close and you're down to your last trade,
hold it.
I think I'd hold it. I'm not going to just be worried about trying to get an extra 30 points when the following week or maybe later in the same round, I could make a sideways move from a premium to a premium who's out and net myself 100. So I think people just have to be patient, work out when all their players are playing and what they can and can't do. Again, we mentioned with Zach Williams, if Zach Williams is out and you're not confident or you don't have a Trent Rivers or someone like that on the Pine, you probably will have to make that move, to cover a donut. But again, the Brad Closes of the world, there's some people who've still got, Xavier O'Neill. You never know, what maybe people had, Hamish Brayshaw and they've just been carrying him all year and now he's going to play. As improbable as it is, let all these rookies, as much as you can,
play on your bench.
See what they score.
Yeah.
Put the emergency on them, see what they score, and then let that, govern your situation, because you don't want to be wasting a trade and not getting a points return.
Yeah, it's some good advice. I'm curious. Let's move to salary cap league focus just for a moment. If you're in a do or die, which all the finals are now, and you look at your opponent and you look at your team, you've got to trade. There's generally this thought will creep into a coach's mind. Do I trade to negate that star player they have that I don't? Or do I trade to keep another variable in my team? generic advice is always dangerous at this time of year because every team's got unique components to their side. But what's your initial thought when a coach comes to you and says, look, he's got player X, I've got this move I want to do, what should I do? Should we negate or should we go for a unique variation to our teams?
I think it just comes down to, MJ, are you the person that you feel like it's in your favour or if it's against? If it's against, I always want to hold a trade if I have one, and I always want to put my captain as late as possible.
Yeah.
Because what you want to have the ability to do is, if things aren't going your way, or if they are going your way, and what I mean by that is, last week, a lot of people, vice-captained or captained Max Gawn in SuperCoach.
Yep.
For people that waited and kept that, maybe they put the vice-captain on Gawn and they put the captaincy on Neil. If you were behind in that matchup and your opponent had Gawn, as good as the captain score as Gawn was, a lot of coaches were able to throw the Hail Mary and move the captaincy to Lachie Neale and just give themselves a chance. And in the end, obviously, Lachie Neale did outscore, Gawn by, 19-odd points.
In SuperCoach.
SuperCoach. So if you're in that situation, you're going to want to be watching what that other person's doing and ideally picking a captain from later in the round. Like, again, obviously, you could get, fortunate and nail a captain. Let's say you put the vice-captaincy on Mitch Duncan and he scores really well.
Danger.
The other thing, MJ, that I did notice, and it was a lot easier last week because we had bye players.
Yep.
So a lot of players, if they loved the vice-captaincy score, let's use the example of Gawn again.
Yep.
They could put the captaincy on Grundy.
Problem
and
solved.
the advantage of that was last week was you could track the matchup. If the matchup was going in your favour and you thought, 132 was going to be enough in SuperCoach, you can just relax. But the beautiful part of having it on a Grundy was if things were going against you and you need a miracle, you had the option of trading Grundy because he wasn't locked out until the very last game. And you also had saved your captaincy. So if you had to change it, you could. So what I'd be cautious of is, just say you are happy with a Mitch Duncan score and he scores really well. That player that you loophole, and at this stage, I think a lot of people have a lot of different players to loophole the score on the field.
Yeah.
Make sure that captaincy person, if you can, is playing as late as possible. For instance, if you've got a Conroy, put it on Conroy. Because what that allows you to do is you can track the matchup, and if things aren't going your way and you need something different to get the job done, you haven't wasted the captaincy. Because if you put it on a player, let's say you put it on Sam Sturt, who plays on the Saturday, and you've locked yourself into Mitch Duncan score, you can't do anything.
Yeah.
You can't pivot away. So look at your team, see who you can put. Again, if you want to take a vice captaincy score, who can you put it on at the latest part of the round? Just in case things don't go your way, you can at least throw a Hail Mary and put a captaincy on someone else. Because you see in these matchups, MJ, that there's a lot of same players, especially with the captaincy. And the flip side, that might allow you, if you're ahead and you've got Lachie Neale, and as good as, let's say Mitch Duncan again was, if you also go Lachie Neale, well, you've neutralised that person's ability to catch back up to you. So it can work in your favour
in the reverse.
In stopping someone catching up to you, even if Mitch Duncan scored a great score. You take the risk out by neutralising his captain. So that's why I say, as good as it is, just let your captain, especially if it's a loophole player, be as late as possible in the round so you can track how that matchup's going.
And the lucky thing for coaches is there's probably 3 or 4 really strong captaincy options in the back half of this round. Monday night, Grundy versus Witts. I think that extra time off of not playing every 4 or 5 days for Grundy's going to help. He's certainly been playing a little bit sore, and they've been managing him through. While the club haven't come out and said that, I think that's fairly obvious to see.
MJ, the other thing as well that's important for Collingwood is
finals.
Finals is not 100% guaranteed.
They've got to go for it.
If they beat Gold Coast,
it is
because they've got Port Adelaide in the last round.
There's no certainty in that one. This is their win.
I think if Grundy's going to be primed for a matchup,
this is one.
It's a matchup like this.
Yeah, and he's going to outwork Witts around the ground. Sure, it might be a bit of an even contest at stoppage, but around the ground, you're going to put your money on that. Lachie Neale, Sunday night, up against the Sydney Swans. While they've certainly got an improving side, you'd still back yourself in that Lachie Neale's going to be a good option. The Bulldogs and the Hawks, both of Mitchell and McRae, even a Bontempelli if you don't have any of those options, or all three of those players are in really strong scoring form. And Matt Crouch, yeah, he's probably a prime target for an Ed Curnow to go to him. But even last week, Matt DeBoer I thought was going to be heading to him, and he went to his brother and to Rory Sloane instead.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing. And I think the main point you've touched on there, MJ, is they have to have a ceiling about them, especially if you're the underdog.
Yes.
And again, you will have some unique players. If you really think you're a massive underdog, well, your best chance at tipping the tables is to use one of your uniques, the one that you think has the best ceiling about them, and give them, especially if you can, the vice captaincy, just to differentiate yourself on a player that the opponent doesn't have. And again, maybe they'll try to trade in to match you or all those fun and games. But at least if that happens, you've caused them to use a trade. So again, I think a guy like Bontempelli, especially in the SuperCoach format, we know when he's at his best what he can do. Josh Dunkley, McRae, as you mentioned, Tommy Mitchell is certainly capable of at his best. But I think there's some guys that you can go off the beaten path and really take advantage of. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's some great vice-captaincy options early in the round too. Geelong versus Richmond, if you're a Menegola, which feels crazy to say, but he's in good form, Duncan, Dangerfield. The Tigers just give up points to opposition midfielders and defenders. Gosh, wouldn't it be crazy to put the VC on Tommy Stewart? Then you look at Essendon. Zach Merritt's in a rich vein of form, even against Port Adelaide. Max Gawn up against either a Mumford or Jacobs. You just think that's a money matchup right there.
And again, a matchup, MJ, where Gawn played nearly 100% time on ground last week. And funnily enough, results have fallen Melbourne's way.
Yeah.
For a win against the Giants,
there's still a chance.
I think a lot of people were worried, and we spoke about it last week. What happens if Melbourne's out of the finals race?
Yeah.
That can't be a good thing
for
Max Gawn. As much of a soldier and as much as he tries to lead from the front, someone that's taken the beating that he's taken this year, that was definitely a concern for people that traded him in. So to see a matchup where a Melbourne win puts them right back in the finals mix again, seems absolutely crazy. And like you said, as good as Sauce Jacobs was last week against his old side, you'd back Gawn in every day of the week to have a monster score. The other one that I really like too is Travis Boak, MJ, against Essendon.
I like that.
At Adelaide Oval, the guy is genuinely a Brownlow medal chance. I know Lachie Neale's had an incredible season, but when you're playing for the team that's top of the ladder, you're as consistent as Travis Boak does. He's hitting the scoreboard. And really, there's not too many other guys in his team that will take votes from him.
I agree.
This is the type of game where you think as a club, hey, if we can get Travis Boak to have another massive game, it's the type of 3 vote that could get him, in that discussion. And it would be an absolute deserved winner. So we've seen what he can do this year, and again, especially in SuperCoach as well. He's really found a
couple of 140s in a row in the past 3.
He's got a ceiling about him, MJ, where I think last year he was obviously had that blinding start and then fell away for whatever reason, but he's just in career best form. And as I said, the team is absolutely humming. And if you've got a unique with him after what Essendon dished up last week and the way that Geelong just smashed them from a fantasy point of view, you wouldn't want to see your opponent have Travis Boak, I'll tell you that.
No, that's true. And then the other one, it's definitely a SuperCoach matchup only, is Nat Fyfe's history against North Melbourne is incredible. If you go back and look through those numbers, again, if you want to get a guy with ceiling, and arguably he's going to be a unique vice-captaincy option after a pretty underwhelming past couple of scores in the SuperCoach format. Geez, these are the kind of moves you need to make, knowing you've got that security blanket of the Neales and the McRaes and the Mitchells a little bit later on in the round.
I think he's interesting, isn't he, MJ? I think he has to be a VC, though, doesn't he?
Yeah, no, not an actual captaincy. No, VC only.
And again, it's part of the role, and I think personally that it's really paying off for Fremantle to have moved Fyfe forward out of the midfield and to the forward line for a bit more of the game. And you've seen it in the way Sarong, Brace, or Chera are all playing and scoring. They've really delivered in that sense. But when you look at his past month, and again, SuperCoach is clearly the format, there's 3 scores in the mid-80s in there, MJ, which is very unnatural.
That's normally his half-time score.
And again, the one big game is the 132 against Richmond who we know are a team that are very happy to let the opposition best, do as they please.
Yeah.
So again, I'd be very hesitant, to put the captaincy on him. Again, he hasn't had a 130, 5+ score since round 3 against Port Adelaide, which was pre the injury and pre the role change. So VC, it's a great matchup, isn't it? Yeah. North Melbourne, the situation they're in, the way that Fremantle's playing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't have the courage, even if it's a unique and, I'm trying to, roll the dice in a head-to-head. I think I'd still want to go somewhere else just because it's not the same Fife role of years past when obviously he's got that, incredible record against North when he had that role.
Yeah, it's a good call. Let's talk about that Fremantle and North game because there's one player in there that has had a pretty strong season up until the last month or so. I'm referring to Todd Goldstein. As an interesting matchup against a Lobb and a Darcy combination, more than likely, how they're going to continue to roll on. And normally you go, look, he's been poor of late. He started actually incredibly well last round, but then pretty much from quarter time onwards, just really faded out of the game. However, it is his 250th game. Is that something that should be enough for coaches as a carrot to go, look, maybe he does turn it on this game, and maybe he's that unique matchup for me either in rankings or leagues that I need? Or is it, if you've got the luxury of moving him on in a trade, he should be the first premium out? What do you think?
I think it's a really tough one, MJ, because the matchup, doesn't terrify me. As good as, Sean Darcy is as a young ruckman and Rory Lobb's a very capable, number 2 when he steps in for stints. It's not a, very scary matchup. The one in round 18 against Nick Natanui, don't love that. So if you're looking, collectively and you think you might get to the grand final and you can move him on early, maybe that's the case. Another thing I think definitely helps Goldstein is he's had a 7-day break.
Yeah.
And when you think about they had the bye before that, so they basically they played 2 games
in 14 days. What a novelty.
That's very unusual this season. And, there was a period, even though he scored pretty well in this time, against Melbourne in round 11, he played 81 minutes. Before this, he was mainly playing in the high 90s.
Yeah.
And again, that was when Majak Daw was in the team, 82 minutes, 86, 88, and then 91. So the minutes are climbing back up, which is really, really encouraging because we know, like any player, the more you're on the ground, the more chances you have of scoring. So if, I've got one trade left, I'm not going to be, I don't think I'm too bothered. I think he can give you a 120 type of score in SuperCoach this week. Again, looking ahead to West Coast, doesn't feel great, but again, maybe you get fortunate in West Coast, give Nick Natanui another week off. But it's encouraging for me that those minutes have been on a climb steadily for the past 5 or 6 weeks. And like you mentioned, he had a great first quarter when North Melbourne was, relatively in the game by the standards. Once the game blew apart,
he was nowhere.
It didn't suit Todd Goldstein, and he still finished with a ton. But after the first quarter, he got half his score in the first quarter. So again, he's not a high priority for me to be trading out. Definitely not someone I'd be bringing in with the other options around. And I feel like for most coaches, MJ, they're probably just stuck with him, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, I think the only format, and again, maybe you're in a position in Dream Team where you've got 4 trades, because in his past 4 weeks of scoring, it's been 59, 63, 58, and 88. Now, if you play AFL Fantasy, he did pick up his average in round 15, which was an 83 at that point in time, but you've got to go back to round 6 for his last score over 90. So it's an interesting one in both AFL Fantasy and Dream Team formats where, I think in SuperCoach, I think if you've still got him, and unless you've got 4+ trades, it feels pretty luxurious, especially with some potential carnage. But in those formats where he's struggling to match it, even with the potential bench cover of a Sam Draper.
Well, that's a worry, isn't it, MJ? When you've got a guy on your pine that's genuinely scoring within the vicinity of him.
That's a lot of
massive
cash.
Flag. And I know it's obviously something that, we'll get to in the next pre-season, but clearly the North Melbourne game style has moved heavily away. When you think about what North Melbourne were at the start of the year, they used the boundary all the time. And why they did that was they thought, in most matchups, we have the best ruckman in most games, and we like our inside mids, to just win that battle and grind the ball forward. And you look at how Goldstein started the season, he was averaging in the high 30 hit-out range for the first 2 months of the year.
Yeah.
In the last 7 to 8 weeks when North Melbourne's, they've started to fall away, and I know they've lost some key bodies, but,
Sure.
They did try to, have a conscious effort of attacking more. It hasn't worked out clearly, but Todd Goldstein's highest hit-out count since round 9 is 26.
Yeah.
His lowest in the first 8 games was 26. He had 51 in there, 41. So the game style, North Melbourne can't put that pressure on. They can't force stoppages, which obviously early in the season was giving Goldstein more chances at hit-outs to advantage, clearances, all that great stuff. They can't get that pressure on opposition. So people like Port Adelaide, you look at the numbers, players, Rockcliffe, Boak, Wines, they all had to field that because they're just holding the ball and moving it at will. So I think that's really hurt Goldstein as well and explains his demise. Yeah, unfortunately, if you're in a position to trade him, great, but I think a lot of coaches will just have to be stuck with him, and he's probably another guy that we won't see in too many sides going forward just due to his age and the club he's at.
Yeah, and if you are considering to moving him on, if you're in that luxurious position in Dream Team where you've got more than 2 trades probably, well, I would call that luxurious. AFL Fantasy, sure, maybe you don't have as much potential flagged, I might not get injured, Doherty, Simpkin, Williams type guys. The problem is he's got the 3rd game of the entire round. And so the guys you're probably looking to move him to, most likely being a Gawn on Saturday night or an O'Brien on Sunday afternoon, there's a lot of things that can take place between those 2 games. You can't look at Draper's score against Port Adelaide as the loophole option through there. So it's a difficult decision with Goldstein because it could almost impact whether or not you get another premium or you cop a donut at some point down the line in the round if things don't go your way.
Yeah, great point, MJ. Normally, North Melbourne don't have the games earlier in the round. They've had it the last few weeks just with the way the season's gone. So it makes it really hard, in my mind, to trade him unless you are so confident in the players that you have, been named. You've got great cover. It seems super luxurious. It's just unfortunate, especially in SuperCoach. A lot of people brought him in and his average was in the mid to high 120s.
When Gawn went out injured, yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately it just hasn't gone that way. As I said, the North Melbourne game styles moved away from him. It's gone to the Luke McDonald, chip and possess rather than the repeat stoppages. So, I guess it's just a learning, isn't it, for us that, you got to really pay attention to everything that's happening. And obviously we saw the minutes plummet as well, which was
that
a massive concern because early in the season it was incredible the amount of time on feet Goldie was getting on the ground. So, one of those decisions that I think a lot of coaches at the end of the season will look back and think, if I'd gone another direction there, or even if I just held Gawn and used the Draper, I probably would in a lot better position. So, really tricky one with Goldie.
Good lesson to learn. As we look at this round as a whole, are there any players or matchups that for you go, okay, I think there's something there? Because for some coaches, they're either trying to buy some uniqueness into their side or buy low on something. I know a lot of people have got really keen on Blake Acres, who right back January 1st, it feels like an eternity to do it. We wrote about him in the 50 most relevant. He kicked it off that, hey, if he gets that midfield time and role, he showed at St Kilda he's a scorer across all formats. Better Supercoach, but a scorer across all formats. Is someone like an Acres or a great pickup for us this week? Is there a matchup in the other 8 games that you see and go, no, there's some money to be made and some, potential grand final positions up for grabs for us if it goes well?
Yeah, I think he definitely is relevant, MJ, because if we think about the players we mentioned off the top, Williams, Doherty, Simpkin, Jack Martin, none of them are super, super top value. So if you're a coach with very little in the kitty, you're probably going to be looking at some sort of combination. Let's just say, and as you mentioned, at the time of recording, we don't know if this is the case, but if a Simpkin and a Doherty are out and you've got no cash in bank, all of a sudden a Blake Acres is super appealing. You get a little bit of cash, to be made, but also you look at the matchup, North Melbourne, and especially if you're a cash league player and you want an instant reward, the way Fremantle are possessing the ball, it's like they had nearly 100 more disposals than Melbourne in torrential rain. And clearly, if you watch the way Blake plays, he covers the ground really nice.
Yep.
He's not an elite user of the ball, but he's competent.
Yeah, he's solid.
And he's a good mark, and he's very capable of tackling. And, since his return to the side, he's been terrific. And that game style, unlike we spoke about with Goldstein, the game style's pivoted in a direction that really suits Blake Acres.
Yeah.
He works hard to space. He can take a mark. He's not a small. He's 6'3", 6'4", MJ. Like,
He's a
very
unit.
capable, on the inside as well. So I think you have to consider a guy like that, because if he pops, let's say an 80 to 100 in DT, it doesn't really matter that next week they've got the Doggies. Who,
No.
They're not super hard. They're not very easy on the flip side, but they're a team that you can score against.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We've got 2 games left, MJ. That's it.
Yep.
The other one I do like as a cheaper unique, and they've just got a terrific fixture in my eyes, is Darcy Byrne-Jones in defence.
Yeah, nice.
Again, you've got Essendon this week, who just absolutely bled a truckload of points. They
Everywhere.
could not, and maybe there's an argument in some people's minds that, they were so bad last week that surely they show something. But Port Adelaide's at home. They're just such a well-oiled machine, and Darcy's certainly a player that's very capable of good scores. I'm talking 80 plus DT this year, 100 plus SuperCoach.
Yep.
Not very expensive, and he's shown a proven track record that he can score.
Start of the year was really good. Yeah.
Started the season really well. We know that Ryan Burton has been in and out of that side. Dan Houston's had different roles, but Darcy's a very capable scorer, and I think against a side like Essendon, can score easily. And they finished with Collingwood. If you've seen any of the numbers that defenders have got against Collingwood,
For like the past 3 years, it's money.
Just the way they play, it allows defenders to possess the ball, take a lot of marks. So when I think about a guy like Darcy, who's more than capable of that, again, as we keep saying, it's 2 games.
That's all I need.
You don't need a massive stretch. And I think if you're strapped for cash, you can do a lot worse than a guy like Darcy Byrne-Jones. And again, Blake Acres up forward. The forward line as a whole is really, really tricky, I find. Like, there's a very clear crew of
the top.
Whitfield,
Petrarca.
Petrarca, Dusty, Andy Brayshaw.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people who have shopped in the ponds of, Toby Green, obviously Jack Martin with the injury, Jai's obviously had his ups and downs due to injury and form. And then, even people who tried to go for a Jeremy Cameron, or even last week thought maybe Riccardi might be useful against the Crows, which on paper looked like a good matchup. He scored in the teens in DT and in the high 20s in SuperCoach.
Yeah.
So it's a line where maybe you do feel, if you've got that pairing of Simpkin and Doherty, maybe you try to go really cheap on the defence front and just ride a matchup and get yourself, a Brayshaw if you don't have him. Maybe you do something like that. And I know there's been a bit of talk, about Liam Duggan, obviously with West Coast having a depleted midfield. He's certainly going to get some opportunity according to Adam Simpson. The hard thing for me with Duggan is he's already played really well. So he's not a very cheap option. And on the flip side, because he actually scored well in the midfield, have we seen enough MJ to suggest that? Because there's some guys like a Duggan that when West Coast possess the ball, he can rack up really quick with the kick mark.
Yeah.
If you're playing inside mid, if you're not tackling, we've seen some, and we've seen it with Gaff, MJ. You don't want Gaff on the inside. When he's around the ball like that, you want him on the outside linking up, using his, hard running, and he's a very tidy kick. So sometimes midfield minutes for some players isn't exactly, what you want. We saw it with Elliot Yeo, that it actually took a bit of time for him to adjust to scoring in the midfield role. He was great in years past, loose in defence, great mark, kicking the ball. So again, I see the appeal with Duggan with that opportunity that presents at West Coast, and maybe he goes ballistic in there and he just has an absolute field day.
Yeah.
But at the price, there's a lot of good guys. Like Nick Haynes isn't that far away from him.
Yeah.
And because that bad score he had a few weeks ago,
that's dropping.
He's about to roll out. So I feel like he's a safe guy against Melbourne. If you're just very risk adverse and you just want a guy that you can depend on, who's going to be very, very, very solid. Even that stinker he had a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
It's not that bad.
Yeah, and it's the Saints the week after, which is a pretty nice matchup too, because Geary's not forward tagging anymore.
Yeah, again, maybe you feel really... Again, there's a guy who's got a big ceiling in SuperCoach, Peter Laddams. You think about the matchup. He's just come off a 3-game suspension for an incident that, he'd be very embarrassed by.
Yep.
He's playing against Essendon. Again, not super, super scary for a guy that's capable of clunking massive contested marks.
No.
The ruck line of Essendon's far from terrifying, as promising as Draper looks.
Yep.
You're not going to be super worried. And then, again, Collingwood, you can score against them also, and especially with their defence, being quite underwhelming. Again, they were one of the best defensive sides, but there's not a matchup that you'd be super worried if you're Laddams. As good as a Darcy Moore is, he's not really that type of guy. Again, there's a capability there with his scoring ceiling. You throw in the midfield time he'll get as a ruckman with the hit-outs in that engine room. But he's shown he's capable of 30, 140 plus scores in SuperCoach, and you'd have to think has a massive point to prove.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. Look, if you're looking for a cheap option in SuperCoach up forward, maybe a Simpkins missing, or maybe you're desperately finding a way to get Riccardi off the field, it's only like 60k from Riccardi up to a Connor Rosie. And with no Zach Butters in the side, maybe just that little extra midfield opportunities. He keeps building some fitness and strength back into that body. Missed a fair few games this year due to injury. Clearly been playing a little bit sore in the front to middle half of the year. I actually quite like that as a ceiling type guy. Ben Ainsworth, if you want to go real unique, Collingwood and Hawthorn, the final two matchups. In fact, in all formats of the game, I don't mind that as a cheap pickup in an AFL fantasy or a dream team. I think there's something through there. So there are players that are there. It's looking at the matchups and realizing that the matchups have evolved and changed. A month ago, you wanted to have midfielders against the Crows. That was the matchup. You wanted to make sure, and that's why people loaded up on their Giants a month ago, and it was the right call a month ago. Whereas as we've seen the past few weeks with Sloan back in the side, Brad Crouch back in the side, Matt Crouch has turned his season around, and then the emergence of Scholl and McPherson have allowed Rory Laird to stay in the midfield and not just be the coverage for those guys. And all of a sudden, those four boys, they're all mid to late 20s, mature bodies, and all strong enough around the contest. They're not going to bleed the points like they were 5-6 weeks ago. So matchups change over time.
MJ, the one I'm curious about too, let's say it's probably more of an AFL fantasy question due to the trades you have available at your disposal. Just say you're healthy. You don't have any of the guys we've mentioned throughout the show. You've pretty much got a completed side.
Yep.
Who are the guys, because there's a few that jump out to me this week, that you would look at as premium players that you would trade out because you're worried about the matchup? I think about, again, we keep saying this, if the ball
goes to Oliver.
Is he going to really lock in on it, Oliver?
Yeah.
Is he going to lock in on a Petrarca? And to be honest, as you mentioned with Adelaide, he went to 3 different players at times in that game and really
was ineffective.
Didn't stop any of them.
Yeah, he was ineffective in all.
Again, as you said, he was on Brad at times. He was on Sloan at times. He was on Matt for a quarter. But it even went to Laird for a few of the stoppages, but didn't really go that way. Again, a lot of people were worried about what does Tuke Miller do to a Neil or a Zorko? What does Hugh Greenwood do to a Neil or a Zorko?
Yeah,
and it had absolutely no effect. Again, on the flip side, Nat Fyfe was as clamped as he's ever been by Matt DeVore. So
yeah,
if you're a coach and you've got Clayton Oliver and you're looking at your side and you can't really work out what you want to do you move someone like him on?
Yeah.
Or do you just upgrade, maybe your lowest scoring premium to another premium? Do you, again, as I keep saying, there's only 2 rounds to go. If one of these guys cops a really poor score
and gets you the 50, yeah.
Gets you a 50. Like, how do you play that, MJ?
I think that ultimately it comes down to what are the type of coach you are and what is the risk that you are prepared to run. It is the risk of being wrong and making the move, or the risk of being right and not making the move. And so what I mean by that is you go, Clayton Oliver's going to get tagged. Clayton Oliver's going to get tagged. I know he's going to get tagged, but I'm going to choose to hold him because I think he might not, even though you believe he will. And you look at another matchup. Maybe it's a Mitch Duncan up against Richmond, and you're like, nah, I know it's good, but I'm not going to touch it. And then Duncan fires, and Oliver gets tagged.
Yep.
That
could genuinely be a 70-point swing this week.
Huge swing in both formats of the game.
Yep.
In absolutely both. One of them to go a 120 and the other to go to 60. Like, that's a genuine switch that we could see. Oliver gets tagged, Duncan gets free reign. That's a 50, 60-point swing. So my thing for you as a coach, rather than saying this is what you should do, is what could you live with more? Holding Oliver, knowing that he's probably getting a tag. Let's be honest, GWS's season is on the line, as is Melbourne's. Whoever wins this game probably stops the other from ever having a chance to make finals. You win, you're still a chance. You need things to go in your favour, but you're still a chance. So there is no way De Boer's not picking Petrarca or Oliver. One of those two, he's going after. I think Oliver, because that's who he's done the job before against and pretty successfully. So it's got to be, what do you want to do? Do you want to be wrong, but on the right side of it? Or do you want to be right and be on the wrong side of it? Whatever you can live with most, that's the way you should play it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we even saw Dylan Clark go to Cam Guthrie of all players in that matchup. And there doesn't seem to be, the number of players that are, genuine taggers
anymore
each and every week.
Yeah.
The one that was very interesting last week, and he's always a danger, and he would be a danger again this week because he can do a really good job of it. I just don't know if it's the type of guy he'd go to. We saw Toby McLean go to Gas.
Yeah, and did a number on him.
Did an absolute number on him. Again, is he the type of guy that goes to a Tommy Mitchell? Probably not, because he's not. He doesn't. Again, to play Toby inside is to take away from McRae, Dunkley, Bonds, and they love what Liver does in there as well alongside Bailey Smith. So maybe it's not that type of guy, but you start thinking, where does he go? Again, would he go to a scrimshaw and just try to take away from his rebounding? I know he's been a unique player in a lot of sides, but again, there's not. De Boer is the obvious one. De Boer's got Oliver, he's got Steele.
Yeah.
So you'd have to think he'd go that way in the last 2 weeks. Maybe you got on the front foot and move those guys. The hard thing about moving an Oliver and a Steele is they've got so many avenues to score in their side.
Yeah.
In their game. So they can take marks, they can tackle, they do all that stuff, but it's not as simple as a guy who's an outside player. And if you take away his marks, he's not really going to score that well. So there's not a really bleedingly obvious, does an Ed Perno follow around a Matt Crouch? There's no one really, MJ, that I think that's a massive worry. That's a huge worry because a lot of teams just aren't going that way at the moment.
It's true. As we're recording this episode, good news. If you're a Zach Williams or a Josh Kelly owner, the club have come out just in the past handful of minutes and have confirmed that both are available to play.
Well, that's massive for that matchup in general,
yeah.
MJ, isn't it? And to be honest, though, and this is just, we've seen it with a player like Zach Williams. If I'm the GWS, absolutely, I'm telling Melbourne that Zach Williams and Josh Kelly are playing.
Yeah.
Let's let them prepare all week to play these two guys. But a player like Zach Williams and the issues he's had, unfortunately, staying on the park.
Yeah.
If I'm a Zach Williams owner, I'm waiting until I see that ball bounce and him on the field.
Yeah, you're not just waiting for the 90 minutes final teams. You're keeping it like the player runs out through the warm-up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's just the type of, unfortunately, guy he is. And again, when you've got Achilles, these things, they can be, and the GWS could be totally honest and be saying that he is fine. But we know with those type of injuries, they can flare up at any stage.
Yeah, he can pull up tight in the warm-up
but
and all of a sudden.
That's good news because he's a very popular pick, especially in SuperCoach.
Yeah, he certainly is. All right, as we get close to wrapping up this episode, what's one bit of advice you give a fantasy coach that's going after the overall rankings? Look, in Dream Team, no one's catching Rids. Let's just be honest. He's number one. Fox is number two. Both members of the panel, so, the boys are dominating through there, represent the brand, lads, nice work. No one's catching Rids. He is so far ahead of everybody else, and he'll hate me saying it, but he's so far ahead of everyone else. No one can catch him. It's not humanly possible, given what he can do through there. So we know that no one can catch the Dream Team leader. AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach, it's game on. If you're in those only handful of spots, genuinely, that's all it is, inside the top 10 to 20 that could catch the leaders, what's your advice for coaches that are chasing hard for that title in AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach?
I want someone that's got a ceiling, MJ.
Yeah.
For me, it's that simple, especially in those formats. It's hard to create separation.
Yeah.
And separation this year is guys that can get in that 120 territory. And it's a very hard thing to do. That's a monstrous score. And again, Matt Crouch has been that guy lately. Dane Zorko, we saw on the weekend, has that potential to go bang. I'm looking through these matchups and I'm just, if I was one of those coaches, I'd be thinking, who's a player that's really on no one's radar at this stage? And what I mean by that is, again, if you're in that top handful, it's not hard to look at the opposition you're, contending with and seeing, does anyone have Josh Dunkley in DT.
Yeah.
A player that when he fires, he can absolutely go
Bananas.
bang.
Yeah.
Absolutely go bang. And obviously with those players, there can be risk of, scores in the 40s and 50s. But
Sure.
if you're really just throwing the kitchen sink and are going pure upside, you need guys with the ceiling. Again, Travis Boak. And this is a guy that, honestly, if I was going for a one-hit burst, I'd actually go for him over Travis Boak.
Yeah, right.
Is Tom Rockcliffe.
Yeah.
Because Dylan Clark did try to tag last week. He wasn't extremely successful against Cam Guthrie.
But he tried.
But he tried, and he kept him relatively low until Guthrie chunked it up. But I got Rockcliffe. He's not going to get rested in game. Like, that's the other thing you've got to worry about. If the Travis Boak and,
The game's over at
absolutely
halftime, yeah.
Again, they can manage him through. Like a Tom Rockcliffe, he's been out of the side.
He's
There's
fighting
no problem
for his...
letting him play 90% time on ground.
Totally.
If it means that Travis Boak plays 70. So
Yeah.
these are the type of guys, we know what Rocky can do. We know
He's got the biggest ceiling we've seen.
He's got one of the biggest things we've ever seen in the game.
Yeah.
And it's the frequency as well. And
he's in
the
good
type
form.
of guy. He's in great form. And I think he is the type of guy that I think if I need that upside, that potential, matchup tick, form tick,
Yeah.
Scoring history tick. Like, it has to be a player like that. There's no point picking a guy
And
that's
unique.
just rock solid.
Yeah.
And he's unique. That's rock solid. Like, you need to go different. You need to go different and be seeing, who can really separate yourself. And I think in a DT point of view, Rockcliffe is that guy for me. Because again, Collingwood, they're not going to bother putting time into anyone. As I said, sometimes MJ, it's actually easier to pick the guys that might have a poor game than pick guys that have a monster game. And like we said, the Olivers, that can be a really tough matchup. Again, you wouldn't be feeling confident with any Richmond players against Geelong when you know what they can do. They can hog a ball for a half and just keep it to themselves and really deprive the opposition. So like a Hooley or a Short, I just wouldn't feel super comfortable, taking a punt as good as they can be. Like, I'm looking at the matchup and just seeing, what is this person's best score? Because you don't need it to be the score they'd get, all the time. You need it to be the score they get this week, one off. And I think Rockcliffe's probably that prototype. Even you get guys like Ed Curnow, MJ, guys that can just have these monster scores. And certainly capable of it. So I think, Rockcliffe, Dunkley, we know the crew that have this upside that if it all clicks, it's absolutely monstrous.
Yeah, no, I think that's some really, really good advice to help coaches absolutely fire home towards the end of their 2020 season. You've just got just 2 rounds left to go in the year. This week, your preliminary final, whether it's draft focus or league focus, that's where you're at. And then rankings, well, they're going to be determined by what happens the following week. And there are some juicy matchups when we look at next week. If you want to look very, very quickly into round 18, ones that immediately capture your eye, West Coast players up against a likely struggling to get to the end of the year North Melbourne.
MJ, especially the forwards. And we know especially in keeper leagues, you can get in a little bit early and maybe just stash a couple of West Coast
Kennedy,
forwards. Liam Ryan,
he's been in good form.
Like, this is where the really, really clever coaches, all of a sudden, if they do get through, if they think, I've got a good team this week, I've got a few spots on the bench, you get to that grand final week and your opponents looking in the waiver pool and wondering where all the West Coast forwards are.
Yeah.
That's a really, thinking ahead type
of move.
We know, obviously, Richmond
against
have the Crows, but that's, again, I don't think it's as juicy as we might have initially thought. Hawthorn maybe, again, against Gold Coast, but you might say the opposite too, that Gold Coast against Hawthorn could be juicy.
Yeah.
But I think that type of stuff, especially in drafts, MJ, as well, you want potential, massive scoring potential, and you want to put them on the emergency. You want to give them the emergency on the bench.
Yeah.
So look at who's playing early in the rounds. Like, you look at what round 18 is now, and West Coast's perfect. It's a Thursday game.
Yeah, both
After
times.
that, you've got the Giants and the Saints on a Friday. So look for those teams,
Rotham,
see
Nielsen,
what you can do.
those kind of guys.
Yeah, and again, West Coast is probably perfect because at least you have the option this week along with St Kilda. So if you can get any guys and put them on the pine and they have a ceiling about them,
Awesome.
That's where you can really set yourself up in a draft format where, everyone's unique in that matchup. So if you can separate yourself and get a few good scores up your sleeve,
Yeah.
again, you go a long way to winning it. And quick one while we're on draft leagues, MJ, if you're in a keeper league and Tom DeConing's on the waivers in a keeper, with the news of, Matthew Cruiser retiring today, Mark Pittonet, clearly the position they recruited him in was to, be that player to replace Cruiser if he went down and, not put all the weight on DeConing. But what he's starting to show in the last few weeks is like he's going to be a pretty serious and certainly a long-term Carlton ruckman. And ruckman aren't easy to find, not ones that play every week. So if you're in a keeper league, especially if you've got a rookie list in your league, I would be grabbing him right now and just stashing him away.
Are there any other guys that you just go, look, depending on the depth of your league, and every keeper league is different, and that's what we love talking about here at the Coaches Panel, all formats and all styles of fantasy footy. It's why we kind of jump around from one format to one style to another. But if you're in a keeper league, season's done, depending on list squads, I get that changes.
Yeah.
Who are the guys you go, if you could just have a look at them off the waivers, it might be worth it because either a positional change comes, a trade comes, or in these cases, a player moves on that opens up a permanent opportunity. Are there any players that immediately jump to mind for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of guys that immediately jump to mind, MJ. And it's the time of year where we start hearing some of these reports. Again, I don't know if these are waiver guys. They're probably guys you'd have to trade for.
Sure.
But Charlie Constable, Quinton Narkle, the reports about them maybe looking for new homes, and both have enormous junior number pedigree, which I both agree is so important to projecting forward at the AFL level. But they've also played and scored really well at AFL level.
When given chances. Yeah.
Exactly. They just happen to be in one of the deepest sides in the competition at the moment. Again, up at the Suns, Braden Fiorini, Will Brodie. Again, we mentioned pre-season that when you bring in players of Matt Rao and Noah Anderson's quality, along with a guy like Hugh Greenwood, who's
Ellis.
very good on the inside and Ellis on the outside, there is going to be a squeeze.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of those guys have been really healthy for them outside of Rao, so they haven't given guys like Fiorini and Brodie
a chance,
much of a go. But again, we both know they're really super competent scorers.
Yep. Connor Blakely.
Again, on a higher level,
same level,
I'd be pushing hard for Rowan Marshall.
Yeah.
If there's an opportunity to get Rowan Marshall, he's going to be a ruck forward
next year
for sure.
I agree.
Next year, for sure. And Paddy Wright is great because he's a great centre bounce ruckman. He's right up there in the crew just behind Nick Nat. Nick Nat's clearly the best centre bounce ruckman. But after that, at that skill of the game, Paddy Ryder is elite. And then what that allows Marshall to do is start in the forward line. And he's going to pick up forward status for sure and be one of the most valuable assets in a keeper league long term. I think the ones you've also got to start thinking about, MJ, is who's had a really great season out of the blue. We saw last year that, Darcy McPherson had this incredible season. But again, when you bring all these names into the side, what happens? Like Essendon's a team that always intrigued me. Like Dylan Shield, he's had a really great season, and I think the shortened game has certainly helped him, and we'll see what happens going forward. But I'm looking at the likes of Darcy Parish, Zach Merritt, Dylan Shield, Devon Smith's been pushed to the half back line. Like it's a really a team that I'd be really scared, investing in long term because there seems to be so much uncertainty. And then also you throw in the fact they're not winning. If you're not winning, that's when things are going to be changed. The real top dog that I would be chasing just on his role is Josh Dunkley. If you can do anything to get Josh Dunkley, all likelihood he's going to be a forward next year.
Yeah, I think he's mid-forward.
We already have him in the top 10 in our books, MJ, as a keeper prospect as a mid. You throw on that forward tag, he rises into the top, I'll say top 5.
Look, I'll tell someone right now, look, it'd take an injury to stop him from being inside the top 10 of the 50 most relevant next year. I'm just telling you right now, like, spoiler alert, for in 9 months' time, how it's going to play out. Like, there's just no way that if he is a forward, and I think he picks it up, that he's not.
The other one, sorry, MJ, is, and this is a team that I've honestly had a lot of success just picking up their players because they always seem to find new homes and a lot of them seem to succeed pretty well, is you can never go wrong getting a Giants player.
So a Haitley Caldwell type?
Haitley, Caldwell, O'Halloran, all of these guys, there always seems to be so much currency about them. And you look at the list of players that have left the club and had really phenomenal fantasy years. Treloar, Jack Steele.
Hoskin Elliott even for a period of time.
And then we even look at more recently. I think this guy's gone under the radar, and I'm sure if you're a keeper owner, you know how good he's been of late. But Will Setterfield's really starting to click. Matt Kennedy, when he got his body right, was right up there as a forward as well. So it's never a bad thing, whether it's in the redraft, the initial draft. If you can get some Giants young players, if they don't make the team, I promise you they'll be at a new home in the next year or two. Again, Aiden Bonner hasn't quite worked out, but again, he's had his own injury
physical
issues. And no North Melbourne players really setting the world on fire. But yeah, I'd be looking at a cheeky bid if I could for a Haitley, a Caldwell, and particularly an O'Halloran, because I think he's the most gettable of those three. Because if these guys find new homes, they're all really capable scorers.
But you've got to do it this side.
Players.
Yeah. And you got to do it this side of the deal, because the moment
once trade radio starts going, MJ, you know that the value of these players.
It'll cost you 3 first-round picks to get Jai Caldwell, and he might only just be a mid-only option for you next year. And then it depends on the team he goes to, which is part of Bonner's issue. He went to a team where they didn't need an inside bull, and that's where he was hoping to become. Bruce was an example of it.
Yeah, the other ones is maybe some of these older guys.
Yeah.
Like I always think an Isaac Smith, any of these guys that are, unrestricted free agents.
Yeah.
If there's that, again, sometimes, MJ, as you know, in a keeper league,
get them cheap.
Half of it is having them cheap and moving them on before the season starts while there is that hype.
Yeah.
So it's almost a stock exchange type of game, and that's why we love it so much. There's so much that goes into it. But we know in about, a month's time, the amount of names that are going to be flying across the desk of everyone in the AFL community. Like, there's just natural rises. So I think this is a really, interesting time for keeper leagues, especially if your league leaves waivers on. A lot of the leagues we play in, list lodgements not until all the way into the NAB or to the pre-season games. So if waivers is on and people are picking up and dropping, you can get some absolute bargains this time of year. And we've already seen 2 retirements today. So all that stuff will start shaking out, and typically when a player moves, there usually is a promise of opportunity, and as a result, a spike. And at the same time, a dip in the players that have remained at that club that, might be vulnerable to their role. And as you said with the Suns, McPherson, Fiorini and Brody, they're either not getting a look in or their scoring's absolutely plummeted. So you got to look at the whole, what comes in and out of a club, because, again, unless you're one of the top dogs, you do get massive swings in average.
Yeah, it's certainly true. Hey, mate, appreciate your work on this episode today.
No worries, MJ. Thank you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I hope for you and your team, you've found your way in your league preliminary final matchup this week. We certainly hope everything goes your way to get you into the grand final. Perhaps you've already advanced through to the grand final, depending on how your final system is, and you're sitting pretty into this round. I hope you enjoy a little bit of a quiet week getting ready for the final week of 2020. Good luck for you, and no matter what you do, I hope it certainly goes your way. And from all of us here at the Coaches Panel, we'll chat to you again at least one more time in 2020.